Good morning and welcome to the show. It is Monday and it's Medical Monday, so I have Dr. Roman Nation here in the studio to talk about Ebola. I mean, it's in the news, if you don't mind. He's like, all right, kind of blindsided me on this whole Ebola thing, but it's in the news, Doc. I mean,
it's
people
everywhere.
Are frightened.
Yeah,
And should we be frightened? Should we be afraid?
We should be aware.
Okay.
Is probably the best way I would put it. But if you look back, we've had this sort of thing pretty much every year since I've been here in Panama City, and every year that I've been in medicine, I started paying attention to it.
There's always been something, hasn't there?
A couple years ago, it was the swine flu. A couple years in between that was the avian flu, and lots of other, and they're all viruses.
There was MERS, that Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. Right. That was a big boogaboo for a while.
Right.
And of course, mad cow. I remember that. I'm old enough to remember Y2K as well.
Correct.
Which is a virus of a different sort, but
yeah. But the whole thing is that there's always some sort of bug that's going to catch the media's eye. I mean, just a few weeks ago was the one about the one infecting kids across the United States. It was an enterovirus. It was a specific subset of enterovirus
that has been in the news
kids.
too. A little boy died from that.
Correct. And those are all the things that catch headlines because they're severe illnesses that that could potentially kill people, and they're pretty easily spread.
And as we know in the news business, if it bleeds, it leads, and it does make a good headline or a bad headline or an eye-catching headline.
Something to get people to pay attention.
But when it comes to men of science like yourself, statistically, should we be worried?
Should we be worried? No. I mean, it is here in the United States now, and there have been confirmed cases, at least one confirmed case of Ebola here. Mm-hmm. But along with everything else, and the thing that I try to keep folks in mind is that as long as you're healthy, you get you take care of yourself and make sure you wash your hands. If you look at the isolation precautions for the person who had Ebola, it's the same as any other isolation droplet precautions that we have in any hospital across the United States. So, I mean, there's hospitals everywhere that all you have to do is develop a specific protocol for it, but it's the same kind of thing as we do when you have TB exposures and those kinds of things.
There were some real serious discussions on TV, with the talking heads that say, hey, this guy showed up with a fever to an emergency room, and they sent him home.
Yeah.
And then he came back, and are the protocols in place?
Well, and the problem that you have is that because the signs of Ebola when it first shows up is just like flu. So, I mean, how many flu cases do you have? How many people go to the emergency room every single day saying, oh, I have a fever, I probably need to be checked for Ebola? I mean, before Ebola, anybody who shows up at the emergency room, I have a fever and a sore throat, I have strep, is always the most common thing, when most likely and more commonly it's actually some just sort of flu that everybody will get over. It just takes a few weeks. It's these types of media things that make things exaggerated because they're really hard to detect. Because if you turn around and tested everybody for Ebola, there's a whole huge expense associated with that when there's really not that much of a reason for it yet.
So just by the law of averages, chances are you're not going to catch it unless you have these type of, I guess, behaviors. I mean, if you've traveled to West Africa, if you were a relief worker in some sort, maybe worked in the medical field in those
healthcare
areas,
workers, right?
You might want to, be tested.
Those kinds of things.
Take some precautions.
And it's the same kind of thing as like if you put yourself at risk for traveling to foreign countries where there's malaria. Okay,
right.
You run the risk of having contracting malaria and bringing that back with you. But the symptoms that start with malaria are just like the flu and any other common cold. So it's very hard to pick up front, and that's why you get these kind of stories about the emergency room doc thinking that they don't know what they're doing, when really they are. They're practicing the same kind of medicine that we all do, and that is you look for the most common likely thing that's there, and you don't hunt for the zebra unless you really get those clues from some guy that says, oh, by the way, I just traveled here from Africa, I've been in a sick village, I've been a healthcare worker, and so on and so forth. That would have probably triggered the doc to say, you know what, I probably need to go looking for some zebras rather than the horse, which is what I think this is.
Yeah, and I think in a particular case of this one fella who went to the emergency room, I guess it was in Dallas, somewhere in Texas, he was West African.
Right.
And you'd have thought that, hey, have you just traveled from there?
Right.
I mean, that would have been...
And a lot of times we don't take travel histories from patients that come into the emergency room because they're just everywhere. Now if he showed up at the airport, and was sick on the plane, and they took him from the airport traveling from West Africa to an emergency room, that would have presented a much different story to the doc that was there.
So now, are there new protocols in place to screen people for Ebola in hospitals?
As far as I know, I don't think so, because it's still not confirmed to be outside. CDC is always publishing updates about it and telling people what to look for. The initial symptoms are flu-like illnesses, and then the main precaution is washing your hands. Just like everything else, it's spread by droplet precautions. So, and it has to have an open mucous membrane, so it's got to have a break in the skin, or get in your mouth, or in your nose, or in your eyes. So, somebody sneezes in your face, then your risk of contracting whatever they've got go up.
Ebola included?
Correct.
Well, on that happy note, we've got to run off to the local weather, and maybe we can talk some people off the ledge after your local weather, brought to you by the West Pittman Law Firm, westpittmanlawfirm.com. Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Dr. Roman Nation, and we're talking about Ebola and whether or not you should be worried. We have the best. Was that scary enough for you?
Yeah.
I mean, should we be afraid? I mean, in the previous segment, you just said just basic hygiene is going to...
What most people overlook. That's the thing.
Yeah. Will keep you relatively safe.
Correct.
And Ebola, although it is a really pernicious disease and is dreaded and kills people in horrible ways, isn't all that contagious, is it?
Well, it's contagious just like the flu is contagious, meaning that it spreads. It spreads from person-to-person contact. But the thing we were talking about in the segment in between is that the deadlier the virus, the quicker it burns out, because it kills its host before it can spread, compared to regular flu, which is far less deadly, but it just makes people sick, and that's why the common cold flu is much more common, is because it's not as lethal.
Right.
So, the same standard precautions that most people forget.
Because it lives in its host and it's able to be passed on and on.
Right.
Whereas in Ebola, it kills its host, and that's the end of that.
It makes the host very, very sick very quickly. So, just like any other normal population, when they see something that's really sick, everything else kind of backs away. And so it doesn't have a chance to spread to the next victim and the next victim and the next victim. So when you look at all of these other, even HIV way back when it was first started, it didn't make the people sick and die real quick. It took years for it to develop into a deadly virus, or to where it was deadly to the host, and that's how it managed to spread. So Ebola, which makes people really sick really fast, is much more likely to burn out faster, just like a couple years ago with avian flu, and before that the swine flu that came through.
But when you talk about a virus burning out quick, there is a human toll that goes along with that.
Yes,
Could we expect some sort of Black Plague scenario, like 1/3 of Europe dropping dead before this thing burns out?
No, I don't think we're anywhere near that anymore with modern medicine. I mean, we have areas in Africa where the care and precautions that we have for medicine are far less advanced than what we have here in the United States.
And just daily living, too. I mean, people are living cleaner and longer. We're smarter about germ transfer and sanitation and all the infrastructure in our society that keeps us healthy.
Yep. Yeah, we have running water and soap and those kinds of things that some people really take for granted and don't utilize, but that's the crux of how all of these things get spread is hand washing, and if people are sneezing on you and those kinds of things, is you cover your cough, all those things that we've talked about before in flu season.
So Ebola is as contagious as, say, a flu.
Correct.
I mean, if someone with Ebola sneezes in your face, you're at risk.
Right.
Should we be worried to travel in airports? I mean, we have got I guess there's been a call to shut down some of these flights from this Western African nations like Liberia and places like that.
It's certainly worth precautions in that regard. If you're traveling to, when the more you're in a bigger international airport, the more risk you're going to be exposed to. The ones I would be particularly concerned about would be little kids, younger kids, and the other ones would be folks that are immunocompromised to begin with, whether they're on chemotherapy or some sort of cancer therapy, those kinds of things. Those are all things that dull your immune system to make you less likely to react or have a longer reaction time to just common flu, much less something that's more lethal like Ebola.
Yeah, like this fella in Dallas. I think he went through Brussels. He transferred in Brussels. How many people did he have contact with there? And then he got on an airplane, which is a sealed up tube, and traveled with a bunch of people there. Yeah. So I guess they have to track back all these people.
They've got to go right through and identify all those people that he potentially had contact with. and announce to those folks that, oh, by the way, you may have been exposed to this person here.
Yeah.
And those are the folks that if they were in Dallas when this gentleman was there, and they get cold, flu, those kinds of things, I would ask them to get checked out. I don't know the specific test that we look for Ebola, but I know it's there.
So it would be a prudent precautionary measure to cancel your reservations to Monrovia for your vacation, Monrovia, Liberia, or any of those.
South Africa. I would postpone my vacation.
Guinea or any of those other West African nations where
for a short period of time. I mean, none of these things ever last forever, and if you really look back and pay attention to it, most of them don't even last more than about 3 or 4 months, just through this period of basically one flu season, and then it all goes away from there.
Yeah, and if we look back, if history is any indicator, we can list off, bird flu, mad cow, MERS, all the other things that we were afraid of.
Right.
That
in the moment, yeah.
And
then, oh, look, I'm still here.
And guess what? We're still here.
Yeah.
So let's not worry so much about Ebola. Just stay clean and use your head.
Be more aware of keeping your hands clean and not sneezing on your neighbor.
Dr. Roman Nation, thank you so much for that helpful tip. Don't sneeze in anyone's face, and don't let anybody sneeze in your face. And you'll probably make it through Ebola, this whole Ebola season that we have now. And we'll be right back after your Mad Hatter Minute.
Hi, this is David Lovett, and this is your Mad Hatter Minute. There are 3 things that may make your car run: fuel, fire, and air. Today, we're going to be talking about the air and the air intake system. Early automobile intake systems were very simple air filters connected directly to the carburetors. A modern automobile intake system has 3 parts. It has the air filter, the mass airflow sensor, and it has the throttle body. Air enters the engine through a snorkel tube located just inside the hood. The raw, cold air comes in contact first with the air filter. A particulate air filter is a device created of fibrous materials that removes the dust, debris, pollen, and bacteria from the air before moving into the engine. The filter air then continues through the snorkel tube to where it reaches the mass airflow sensor, or commonly known as the MAF sensor, M-A-F sensor. Mass airflow information is then transferred digitally to the electronic control unit, or the brain of the vehicle, for which it tells how much air is entering the vehicle and how much fuel should be distributed in connection with the entry of the air. The throttle body controls the amount of air being distributed back into the engine. Whereas the mass airflow sensor measures the air, the throttle body actually controls the air. This in turn controls the amount of fuel ratio to be delivered back into the engine. And keeping a clean air filter, keeping a clean throttle body creates better running vehicles. I'm David Lovett, and this has been your Mad Hatter Minute.
Hey folks, this is Joshua Brown with Mad Hatter on 23rd Street. Is your check engine light on? If it is, text MADHAT28, that's MADHAT28, to 24247, and we'll check it for free.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Dr. Aaron Shores from Spine and Neuropain Specialists here in Panama City. Dr. Shores, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
And I see you brought a friend with you again.
I did, yes.
For illustrative purposes only, I'm sure. Now, you've got some new technology at your practice that you're having some success with, don't you?
Yes, we do. We have a procedure we're doing now, or offering our patients, called cooled radiofrequency.
Cooled?
Cooled. Like
just
I'm cold.
C-O-O-L?
C-O-O-L-E-D.
Cooled.
Cooled.
Radio frequency.
Radio frequency, or cooled RF, which is a procedure we're able to offer patients that have persistent hip and knee pain. We can also use it in some aspects of the spine, but for years we've run into patients that have had chronic hip and knee pain that have either had multiple surgeries on the knee and or hip replacements or knee replacements, and been told by their orthopedist that there's just not a lot more that we can offer you for your persistent pain, because not everybody who has surgery has 100% resolution in their joint pain.
So what is this cooled radio frequency? How does it work, and what does it do?
So basically, it's a needle. It's an injection. There's no surgery, no scalpels, nothing like that. There's just 2 or 3 nerves that go to. There's 2 nerves that go to the hip joint that are sensory nerves, and that we can put a needle on those nerves. And
Could we see that on Mr. Bones here?
Absolutely. So this is we'll work on this hip here, but there's this is the hip joint, and oftentimes the hip joint itself can be a significant pain generator. So there's
I know people go for hip replacements and things like that. They take a beating. Your hips.
It can be quite uncomfortable, and even like again, surgery doesn't always fix everyone. So there can be some persistent pain. So by sticking 2 needles down here, basically adjacent to the hip, it's not a motor nerve, which means that it's not going to cause paralysis or weakness in the leg.
It's really just a pain sensor.
It's just, those 2 nerves are just intended to make you uncomfortable. So we can put a needle on those
God's
nerves.
cruel joke.
Right.
No doubt, yes.
And those nerves aren't shown visibly here on the spine, but they're in this general vicinity. And we can just put a needle on those nerves, and we basically heat that little sensory nerve using water to localize the lesion. And it takes about 15-20 minutes to do it. Usually takes a couple weeks to know how much of a response you're going to get, but we're having some good success in our practice with the patients who have persistent hip and knee pain that otherwise have not been able to get relief.
It sounds like the procedure might be a little painful if you're sticking a needle in a nerve.
Yeah. Well, we're sticking the needle not inside the nerve, we're actually just adjacent to the nerve.
I see.
But we can do it with sedation. We use plenty of numbing medicine. So actually, most patients tell me that the anticipation of doing it is actually far worse than actually doing it. And these are patients that have already usually gone through an extensive amount of pain over the years because of the joint and/or have had multiple surgeries. So it's most patients find it a much more enjoyable experience than having a major surgery on the joint.
So the needle does not go directly into the nerve, but it goes near it, and then that's when all this radio frequency magic happens.
Correct. It's radio frequency magic. It basically creates a little circular burn or lesion, we call it, that kind of just basically burns the nerve in a sense, almost like a soldering iron, to just interrupt the pain transmission from the joint itself. Which is nice because that nerve you're not going to miss. Its sole purpose is usually to make folks uncomfortable. So by just disrupting the transmission of those pain fibers, patients are able to find an improvement in their pain and also quality of life. They're able to do a little bit more. They're able to get around a little bit better, less medication, all things that we find most patients are looking for.
Now, do you do this in one procedure, and is it in the office, or do you have to go to the hospital for this? Or?
Correct. Yeah, it's one procedure, and right now we need to do it over at the hospital, but it's done as an outpatient procedure. The procedure itself takes about 15-20 minutes, but most patients are at the hospital for a couple hours. It takes time to get you ready and then do the procedure, and if we give a little anesthesia or something to help someone relax, to let them recover from that. But we don't put people completely asleep. There's no need. We don't have to put a tube down your throat because a lot of the folks that sometimes have hip and knee pain have other medical conditions that sometimes make going under completely for a major surgery difficult. So this is something that we can offer to many of our patients.
Sounds really, although there's a needle involved, it sounds much less invasive than some other surgeries that you might have to do to correct a problem like that.
Absolutely. Very minimally invasive. There's no sutures, no scalpels. Patients are up and running around the next day, and we've had a lot of success with it.
Well, that's really remarkable stuff.
Yeah.
Let's hear from medical science.
Dr.
Aaron Shores, thanks so much for coming on the show and telling us about this new Cooled
RF.
Cooled RF technology that
Yes,
you're
sir.
using at Spine and Neuro Pain Specialists
Yes,
here
sir.
in Panama City. And we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to the show. I have Thomas Winterman here in the studio yet again to give us our Thrive Tip of the Week. Thomas, you wrote a whole book about having a Thrive life and how to be, a healthy and well-adjusted human and have a more productive life.
Yep.
You've been giving us tips here that are great. What is our tip for the week?
For this week, it's to avoid the common mistakes. When it comes to goal setting, personal development, when you work in it long enough, you start to see patterns of problems that people have. And the biggest mistakes in goal setting are people set goals that are not specific enough, or goals they can't possibly achieve, or goals that are not measurable. Those are the 3 big mistakes. And if you can avoid those, you can be a little bit more successful.
Has to be specific.
That's right.
Has to be achievable. And what was the third one?
Measurable.
Measurable.
Measurable. And that's really big. That's really big. The analogy I use is imagine you're in a college course and you get there and the teacher says no homework. And you say, oh, that's great, no homework. I'm really excited about this. And then there's no assignments throughout the semester. And then you can't contact the teacher. All you're graded on is the final test at the end of the year. That sounds great, but you've had no way to measure your learning.
Right.
You've had no way to learn where you are, and the end of the year, you're pass-fail, you're in big trouble. That's why homework is helpful, and the same thing goes with goal setting. you have to measure your progress throughout the duration of the goal so you know which way you're going.
Right, and you got to make it achievable. So almost like, say, if you're on some sort of weight loss mission, I want to lose 50 pounds.
Yeah.
But you're not going to do it in a month, and
Right.
you're not going to do it in a year, but you're going to have to step on that scale once a week.
That's
and say,
right.
well, maybe I lost a pound, or maybe I lost a half a pound.
That's
You know?
right. Make it achievable. You want to lose 50 pounds? Make it a year.
Yeah.
Make it a year. That's about a pound a week. That's doable. That's healthy. A lot of people want to lose 50 pounds in 3 months.
Yeah.
That's not healthy. If you lose 50 pounds in 3
Yeah.
months, there's probably a problem going on there.
Or you could get your own reality show and, and lose weight like crazy. And
Right.
there are people who do that. Competitive weight loss is kind of weird,
Yeah.
you know, but it is entertainment for some people.
Right.
But in the real world where we live, you know, make it achievable. So our Thrive Fit tip for the week again is
Avoid the common mistakes.
avoid the common mistakes. Thomas Winterman, we're going to have to let that be the last word. Thanks for that Thrive tip, and we'll see you next time.